17-year-old Zara had always been the quiet one in her family. While her father dominated stages across the country with his smooth voice and charming smile, she preferred the silence of her bedroom or the peaceful corners of the local library. Her father, David, was one of those singers everyone knew. His songs played on the radio constantly, and people would stop him on the street just to shake his hand or take a selfie. But fame came with a price that Zara knew all too well. She remembered countless nights falling asleep to the sound of her parents arguing about tour schedules, missed birthdays, and the constant pressure of staying relevant in the music industry. She watched her mother struggle with loneliness while David traveled for months at a time. She saw how the spotlight could blind people to what really mattered. That's why Zara had made a decision early in her teenage years. Music would not be her path. She wanted something stable, something that would let her help others without all the drama and chaos that seemed to follow her father everywhere he went. She dreamed of becoming a veterinarian, spending her days caring for animals who couldn't speak for themselves. What nobody knew, not even her parents, was that Zara had inherited something special from her father. Every time she was alone in her room, she would softly hum melodies that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her soul. When she was sure nobody was around, she would sing quietly to herself, her voice carrying emotions she couldn't express any other way. These private moments were sacred to her. She would sit by her bedroom window, looking out at the city lights, and let her voice flow like water. Sometimes she sang songs she had heard on the radio, but more often she created her own melodies, weaving together words and music that seemed to appear from nowhere. The first time she realized her voice was different was when she was 14. She had been singing softly in the shower, thinking the running water would mask any sound. When she stepped out, she found her younger brother standing outside the bathroom door with his mouth wide open. "Was that you singing?" he had asked, his eyes wide with surprise. Zara felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "Don't be silly," she had said quickly, wrapping a towel around herself. That was just the radio. But her brother wasn't fooled. "Zara, that was amazing." "You sound like what?" she had snapped, more harshly than she intended. "Like Dad," he whispered. Those words hit her like a punch to the stomach. The last thing she wanted was to be compared to her father. She made her brother promise never to mention what he had heard. And from that day forward, she was even more careful about when and where she let her voice free. Her parents had no idea about her hidden talent. During family gatherings, when relatives would joke about whether she had inherited the family gift for music, Zara would just shrug and change the subject. When her father offered to give her singing lessons or buy her a guitar, she would politely decline, saying she was too busy with schoolwork. David often seemed puzzled by his daughter's complete lack of interest in music. "Most kids would love to learn from a professional," he would say to his wife. "But Zara acts like music is contagious or something." Her mother would just smile sadly. "Maybe she's seen too much of what this industry can do to people," she would reply. Can you really blame her for wanting something different? At school, Zara was known as the smart, quiet girl who always had her nose in a book. She excelled in science classes and spent her free time volunteering at the local animal shelter. Her friends knew who her father was, but she had asked them not to make a big deal about it, and they respected that wish. Sometimes, though, the music would call to her so strongly that she couldn't ignore it. Late at night, when the house was quiet and she was sure everyone was asleep, she would put on her headphones and sing along to her favorite songs. Her voice would blend with the music, creating harmonies that gave her chills. During these moments, she felt connected to something larger than herself. It was as if her voice had its own life, its own purpose that she didn't fully understand. But as soon as the song ended and reality came rushing back, she would feel guilty, as if she had betrayed her own principles. The conflict inside her grew stronger as she got older. Part of her longed to explore this gift that seemed to flow through her so naturally, but another part of her was terrified of becoming like her father, of getting caught up in a world that demanded everything from you and often gave very little back. She had seen what happened to other singers' children who tried to follow in their parents' footsteps. Some succeeded, but many seemed to live forever in their parents' shadows, constantly compared and never quite measuring up. Others became cautionary tales, their personal struggles splashed across tabloid magazines for the world to see. Zara was determined to be different. She would build her own life, make her own choices, and find her own way to make a difference in the world. Music might be in her blood, but it didn't have to be her destiny. What she didn't know was that destiny has a way of finding you, even when you're running in the opposite direction. Sometimes the very thing you're trying to avoid becomes the key to discovering who you're truly meant to be. As her senior year of high school progressed, Zara threw herself even more deeply into her studies and volunteer work. She applied to several veterinary programs and was already receiving acceptance letters. Her future seemed clear and stable, exactly what she had always wanted. But deep inside, in those quiet moments before sleep, her voice still called to her, waiting for its moment to be heard by the world. The invitation came on a Tuesday afternoon, delivered by a man in an expensive suit who seemed to take up too much space in their modest living room. Richard, her father's manager for the past 15 years, always made Zara uncomfortable. There was something about the way he looked at people, as if he was constantly calculating their worth in dollar signs. "David, this is going to be the event of the year," Richard was saying, spreading glossy photographs across the coffee table. 25 years in the business. "We're talking about a celebration at the Apollo Theater. Every major name in the industry will be there." Zara's father picked up one of the photos, his eyes lighting up with excitement. The Apollo Theater had always held special meaning for him. It was where he had first performed professionally, where he had met some of his closest friends, and where he had proposed to Zara's mother during a surprise encore performance years ago. "The whole family needs to be there," Richard continued, his gaze sliding over to Zara, who was trying to become invisible in the corner armchair where she was reading. "This is about legacy, about showing the world that the family dynasty continues." Zara felt her stomach tighten. She had been dreading this conversation for weeks. Her father had mentioned the anniversary celebration several times, but she had hoped it would be one of those industry events where family members could politely stay home. "I don't really need to be there," she said quietly, not looking up from her book. "It's your night, Dad. I'd probably just get in the way." David's face fell slightly. "Zara, honey, you're my daughter. Of course I want you there. This is a big moment for our family." Richard leaned forward, his smile sharp and predatory. Besides, it would look strange if David's only daughter wasn't there to support him. People might start asking questions. The way he said it made Zara's skin crawl. Everything with Richard was about appearances, about managing public perception. She was just another prop in her father's carefully orchestrated image. Her mother, Lisa, reached over and squeezed Zara's hand. "We'll all be together," she said gently. "You won't have to do anything except sit in the VIP section and enjoy the show." Against her better judgment, Zara agreed. The weeks leading up to the event were a whirlwind of activity. Their house became a constant hub of phone calls, meetings, and planning sessions. Dress fittings, interview schedules, and guest lists dominated every conversation. Zara tried to stay out of the chaos, but Richard seemed to have other plans. He would make comments about how she should embrace the family, business, and how genetics don't lie. Each comment made her more determined to stick to her plan of staying far away from the music industry. The night of the celebration finally arrived. The Apollo Theater was transformed into a glittering showcase of music history. Red carpets, flashing cameras, and crowds of fans created an electric atmosphere outside the venue. As their car pulled up to the entrance, Zara felt overwhelmed by the noise and spectacle. Inside, the theater was packed with industry heavyweights, fellow musicians, and celebrities. Zara recognized faces from magazine covers and award shows. Everyone seemed to know everyone else, moving through the crowd with practiced ease and air kisses. The VIP section was located just to the side of the stage, with plush seating and a perfect view of the performance area. Zara found herself seated between Richard and her Aunt Kelly, who kept pointing out famous people in the audience and sharing gossip about their personal lives. As the lights dimmed and her father took the stage, Zara had to admit that he was in his element. The crowd erupted in cheers as he launched into his first song, his voice strong and confident. For all her complicated feelings about the music industry, she couldn't deny that her father was genuinely talented. The first part of the show went smoothly. David performed his greatest hits, told stories about his career, and charmed the audience with his natural charisma. During the intermission, industry colleagues and old friends came over to the VIP section to pay their respects and catch up. It was during this intermission that Richard excused himself and walked onto the stage. Zara didn't think much of it at first. Managers often handled logistics during breaks, making announcements or introducing special guests. But when Richard grabbed the microphone and the spotlight focused on him, something in his expression made Zara's blood run cold. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard's voice boomed through the theater, "we have a very special treat for you tonight. As you know, talent often runs in families, and David's beautiful daughter Zara is here with us this evening." Zara felt the color drain from her face. This wasn't part of the planned program. She looked around frantically, but the spotlight was already finding her in the crowd. "Now I know what you're all thinking," Richard continued with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Does the apple fall far from the tree? Well, tonight we're going to find out. Let's get young Zara up here to show us what she's inherited from her old man." The audience began to applaud and cheer, thinking this was a planned surprise. Some people were already pulling out their phones to record what they expected to be a cute family moment. Zara shook her head vigorously, mouthing no to Richard, but he was clearly enjoying the attention. Her father looked as surprised as she was, but he was trapped on the side of the stage with no way to intervene. "Come on, don't be shy," Richard called out, gesturing for her to come forward. "The audience wants to meet David's little girl." Two security guards appeared at her side, smiling politely but firmly guiding her toward the stage. Zara looked back desperately at her mother, who was trying to stand up to stop what was happening, but the crowd was already cheering and blocking her path. As she was led through the audience, Zara could hear people commenting about how nervous she looked, how sweet it was that she was shy, and how they couldn't wait to hear what she sounded like. Some were already speculating about whether she would be as good as her father. The walk to the stage felt like it lasted forever, and ended too quickly at the same time. The Apollo Theater, with its legendary history and imposing presence, seemed to loom over her as she climbed the steps. Richard was waiting for her with the microphone, his smile now seeming almost cruel. He had orchestrated this moment perfectly, knowing that once she was on stage, she couldn't easily escape without causing a scene that would embarrass her father. "Here she is, folks," Richard announced as Zara reached the center of the stage. "David's pride and joy. Now let's see if she can carry a tune." The audience laughed and applauded, completely unaware that they were about to witness what Richard intended to be a public humiliation. He was counting on Zara being too nervous or inexperienced to perform well, creating a moment that would make her father look foolish and give Richard more control over the family's public image. What Richard didn't know was that he had just made the biggest mistake of his career. Standing on the Apollo Theater stage, Zara felt like she was drowning in front of 1,500 people. The lights were so bright she could barely see past the first few rows, but she could feel the weight of every single pair of eyes focused on her. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure the microphone would pick it up. Richard stood beside her with that smug expression, holding the microphone just out of her easy reach. "Now don't be nervous, sweetheart," he said loud enough for the audience to hear. "Just give us a little something. Anything will do." The condescending tone in his voice made something snap inside Zara. She had spent years watching this man manipulate her father, control family decisions, and treat everyone around him like pawns in his game. Now he was trying to humiliate her in front of all these people, thinking she was just another piece he could move around on his chessboard. In the wings, she caught a glimpse of her father. His face was a mixture of shock, anger, and helplessness. He was gesturing frantically to someone off stage, probably trying to figure out how to end this nightmare before it got worse. Her mother was standing at the edge of the VIP section, looking like she was about to climb onto the stage herself. The audience was getting restless. Some people were chuckling softly, expecting an awkward moment from a nervous teenager. Others were whispering among themselves, already pulling out their phones to record what they assumed would be an embarrassing family moment that would probably end up on social media within minutes. "Come on, honey," Richard pressed, his smile getting wider. "Cat got your tongue? Your daddy's been singing since before you were born. Surely you picked up something along the way." That's when Zara realized what was really happening. This wasn't just about putting her on the spot. Richard was trying to prove a point about her father's family, about whether David's success was just luck or if there was real talent in their bloodline. If she failed here, it would reflect badly on her father's legacy. But if she succeeded, Zara took a deep breath and stepped forward, reaching for the microphone. Richard's eyebrows shot up in surprise. He had clearly expected her to run off the stage in tears or to mumble through a few bars of happy birthday before escaping. Actually, Zara said, her voice carrying clearly through the theater's sound system. "I'd like to sing something." The audience quieted down, sensing that something unexpected was about to happen. Even Richard looked caught off guard by her sudden confidence. Zara closed her eyes for a moment, thinking about all those nights alone in her room, all those times she had let her voice free when no one was listening. She thought about the animals at the shelter who couldn't speak for themselves, about all the times she had felt voiceless in her own life. When she opened her eyes, something had changed. The fear was still there, but it was mixed with something else now. Determination, power, purpose. "I'm going to sing Strange Fruit," she announced clearly. The choice surprised everyone, including herself. It wasn't a safe, crowd-pleasing song. It was challenging, emotional, and demanded real vocal skill to pull off effectively. A hush fell over the theater. This wasn't what anyone had expected from a nervous teenager thrust into an uncomfortable situation. Zara began to sing without any musical accompaniment, her voice starting soft and low. The haunting melody filled the theater, each note precise and deliberate. But as she moved through the first verse, something extraordinary began to happen. Her voice started to open up, revealing layers of tone and emotion that nobody had anticipated. The timid girl who had been dragged onto the stage was transforming before their eyes into something else entirely. By the time she reached the chorus, Zara's voice had blossomed into something magnificent. It was clear and powerful, but also deeply emotional, carrying pain and hope in equal measure. She wasn't just singing the song, she was living it, breathing it, making it her own. The audience was completely silent now. People who had been chatting or checking their phones were frozen in their seats, caught up in the raw power of what they were witnessing. This wasn't a cute family moment anymore. This was artistry. In the VIP section, her mother had tears streaming down her face. Her Aunt Kelly was gripping the arms of her chair, staring at Zara as if she was seeing her for the first time. Richard's smug expression had completely disappeared. His mouth was slightly open, and for the first time since Zara had known him, he looked genuinely shocked. His plan to embarrass her was backfiring spectacularly. But it was her father's reaction that moved Zara the most. When she caught sight of him in the wings, she saw that he was crying openly, his hand pressed to his chest as if her voice was physically affecting him. He wasn't just proud, he was awed. As Zara moved into the final verse, her voice soared even higher, filling every corner of the historic theater. She was no longer thinking about the audience or Richard or even her own fear. She was completely lost in the music, in the story the song was telling, in the power of her own voice. The last note hung in the air for what felt like an eternity. The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, Zara wondered if she had made a terrible mistake, if she had misread the situation completely. Then the theater exploded. The audience leaped to their feet as one, applauding and cheering with an intensity that shook the building. People were wiping tears from their eyes, shouting "Bravo!" and "Incredible." Some of the industry veterans in the crowd looked like they had just witnessed something they would remember for the rest of their lives. Zara stood in the center of the stage, still holding the microphone, completely overwhelmed by the response. The girl who had spent years hiding her voice had just revealed it to the world in the most dramatic way possible. Richard was still standing beside her, but now he looked like he wanted to disappear. His attempt to humiliate her had instead created a moment of pure magic, and everyone in the theater knew it. In the wings, her father was pushing past security guards and stagehands, desperate to get to his daughter. When he finally reached her, he wrapped her in a hug so tight she could barely breathe. "Zara," he whispered in her ear, his voice shaking with emotion. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." The standing ovation continued for what felt like forever. People in the audience, re-recording everything, but now it wasn't to capture an embarrassing moment. They were documenting the birth of something special, the moment when a hidden star finally stepped into the light. As the applause finally began to die down, Zara realized that everything had just changed. The life she had carefully planned, the future she had mapped out, the wall she had built between herself and the music industry, all of it had just crumbled in the span of a single song. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of what came next. The minutes following Zara's performance felt like a dream that kept shifting between wonderful and terrifying. As her father held her on stage, the applause continued to wash over them in waves. She could see people in the audience wiping their eyes, some still standing and clapping as if they couldn't quite believe what they had just witnessed. When the ovation finally died down, her father gently guided her off stage, his arm protectively around her shoulders, but even in the wings there was no escape from the intensity of what had just happened. Stagehands, backup musicians, and technical crew members were all staring at her with expressions of amazement. "That was incredible," whispered Jake, her father's longtime guitarist. "I've been in this business for 30 years and I've never heard anything like that from someone so young." Backstage was chaos. People were rushing around trying to figure out how to handle what had just happened. The second half of the show was supposed to continue, but everyone seemed too stunned to focus on anything except Zara's unexpected performance. Richard appeared at her side, and for the first time since she had known him, he seemed genuinely shaken. Gone was the smug confidence, replaced by something that looked almost like panic. "That was unexpected," he said, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. "We should probably discuss how to handle the media response to this." Before anyone could respond, a small crowd of people began gathering around them. Record executives, talent scouts, and industry insiders who had been in the audience were making their way backstage, all wanting to meet the girl who had just delivered what many were already calling a career-defining performance. "David, you never told us your daughter could sing like that," said Patricia Williams, a legendary A&R executive who had discovered some of the biggest names in contemporary music. "That wasn't just good for a teenager. That was world-class talent." More people kept arriving. Zara found herself shaking hands with people whose names she recognized from album credits and award shows. Everyone wanted to know if she had any recorded material, if she was working on an album, if she had representation. "We need to talk," said Michael Chen, a producer who had worked with multiple Grammy winners. "That voice needs to be heard by everyone." "I'm talking about recording contracts, major label deals, the works." Zara felt overwhelmed by all the attention. These were the same kind of conversations she had watched happen around her father for years, but now they were about her. Part of her was thrilled by the recognition, but another part was terrified by how quickly everything was moving. Her mother appeared through the crowd, looking both proud and protective. "Let's slow down a little," Lisa said firmly. "Zara just sang one song. She's still in high school." But the industry wheels were already turning. People were exchanging business cards, setting up meetings, and making plans. Someone mentioned that a major music blog had already posted about the performance, calling it the most surprising moment in Apollo Theater history. Richard was working the crowd, clearly trying to position himself as Zara's representative. She watched him tell story after story about how he had discovered her talent, and knew she had it in her all along. The lies came so easily to him that Zara wondered if he actually believed them himself. Meanwhile, phones were buzzing constantly as videos of her performance spread across social media. Someone showed her a clip that had already been viewed thousands of times, with comments pouring in from people around the world who were amazed by what they were seeing. "This is just the beginning," Patricia said, pulling Zara aside. "Voice like yours comes along maybe once in a generation. But you need to be smart about your next moves. The industry can eat young talent alive if they're not careful." Her father finally managed to clear a path through the crowd and led Zara to a quiet corner where they could talk privately. His eyes were still red from crying, and he kept looking at her as if he was seeing her for the first time. "Honey, I had no idea," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "All these years you had this gift and I never knew. Why didn't you tell me?" Zara struggled to find the words to explain. "I was scared," she admitted. "I watched what the music business did to our family. How it pulled you away from us, how it made everything complicated. I didn't want that for myself." David nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "And now?" "I don't know," Zara said honestly. "Everything feels different now. That feeling on stage when I was singing. I've never experienced anything like that before. It was like my voice had its own life." Before her father could respond, Richard appeared again with a small group of executives trailing behind him. "We need to strike while the iron is hot," he said, his manager persona back in full force. "I've already got 3 labels interested in meeting with Zara this week. We could have a recording contract signed by the end of the month." "Absolutely not," her mother said sharply, stepping between Richard and her daughter. "Zara is 17 years old. She has college applications pending and a whole life planned out that has nothing to do with music." "With respect, Lisa," Richard replied, Opportunities like this don't come around twice. That performance tonight opened doors that most singers spend their entire careers trying to get through. The tension in the small group was thick. Zara could see the conflict playing out in her father's eyes. As a musician, he understood the industry and knew that Richard was right about the rarity of this opportunity. But as a father, he wanted to protect his daughter from making decisions she might regret. "What do you want, Zara?" her father asked quietly. "This is your choice to make." Everyone fell silent, waiting for her answer. Zara looked around at all the faces surrounding her, industry executives with dollar signs in their eyes, her parents torn between pride and protection, and Richard calculating his next move. The truth was, she didn't know what she wanted. An hour ago, her biggest concern had been finishing her college applications. Now she was being offered a chance to enter a world she had spent years trying to avoid. But something had awakened in her on that stage. Her voice had felt like coming home to a part of herself she never knew existed, the connection she had felt with the audience, the power of moving people with nothing but her voice. It was intoxicating and terrifying at the same time. "I need time to think," she said finally. "This is all happening so fast," Patricia nodded approvingly. "Smart girl. Take your time, but don't take too long. The industry moves quickly, and momentum is everything." As the evening wound down and the crowd began to disperse, Zara found herself alone with her family for the first time since her performance. The theater was mostly empty now, but she could still feel the energy of what had happened hanging in the air. "Are you okay?" her mother asked, sitting down beside her in one of the plush VIP chairs. Zara thought about the question seriously. "I think so," she said. "But I feel like everything just changed and I'm not sure what that means yet." Her father sat down on her other side. "You know, when I was your age, I thought I had my whole life figured out too. Sometimes the best things happen when we're brave enough to let our plans change." As they sat together in the quiet theater, Zara realized that her carefully constructed wall between herself and the music industry had already crumbled. The question now wasn't whether her life would change, but how she would choose to shape that change. The scared girl who had been dragged onto the stage was gone. In her place was someone new, someone who had tasted the power of her own voice and found it impossible to forget. 6 months after that night at the Apollo Theater, Zara's life had transformed in ways she never could have imagined. The girl who once hid her voice in the safety of her bedroom was now sitting in a professional recording studio, putting the finishing touches on her debut album. But the path to get here hadn't been easy or straightforward. In the weeks following her performance, the offers had poured in like a flood. Record labels, managers, and producers all wanted to sign the girl who had captivated an entire theater with just her voice. Her phone rang constantly, and reporters showed up at her house wanting interviews about the overnight sensation. The attention was overwhelming, and for a while, Zara retreated back into herself. She stopped singing altogether, even in private, scared by how much her life had changed in a single moment. The college acceptance letters that arrived felt like lifelines to her old plan, her safe path. It was her father who helped her find her way through the confusion. "You know what the difference is between talent and calling?" he asked her one evening as they sat on their front porch, watching the sunset. "Talent is what you're born with. Calling is what you choose to do with it." "But what if I choose wrong?" Zara had asked. "What if I end up miserable like so many other singers do?" "Then you choose again," he said simply. "The beautiful thing about having a voice like yours is that it will always be there, waiting for you to use it however feels right." That conversation changed everything for Zara. She realized that she didn't have to choose between her old dreams and this new possibility. She could create her own path. The first decision she made was to finish high school. Despite pressure from several labels to start recording immediately, Zara insisted on completing her education first. She wanted to prove to herself and everyone else that she could handle both success and responsibility. The second decision was harder. She fired Richard as her manager. "You tried to humiliate me," she told him during their final meeting. "You thought I would fail, and you were willing to embarrass my father and me for your own entertainment. I don't want to work with someone who doesn't believe in me." Richard tried to argue, pointing out all the opportunities he had created for her, but Zara had made up her mind. Instead, she chose to work with Patricia Williams, the executive who had approached her with respect and genuine interest in her artistic development. The recording process was unlike anything Zara had ever experienced. Working with producer Michael Chen, she discovered that her voice was even more versatile than she had realized. She could handle jazz standards, contemporary R&B, gospel influences, and even some folk elements that created a sound uniquely her own. Her debut single, Finding My Voice, was a song she wrote herself about that night at the Apollo Theater. It told the story of a girl who had been afraid to speak up, who had hidden her truth, and who finally found the courage to be seen and heard. The song was released on a Tuesday morning, and by evening it was climbing the charts. Radio stations across the country picked it up, and the music video, which featured footage from her Apollo performance, went viral within hours. But success in the music industry came with challenges Zara hadn't anticipated. She faced criticism from people who claimed she was only successful because of her father's connections. Others questioned whether her Apollo Theater performance had been a setup, a publicity stunt designed to launch her career. The hardest criticism came from people who said she was abandoning her own principles, that she had become exactly what she once claimed to reject. Those comments stung because part of her worried they might be true. It was during this difficult period that Zara made her third important decision. She would use her platform to make a difference in ways that mattered to her. She established the Speak Up Foundation, a nonprofit organization that provided music education and vocal training to young people from underprivileged backgrounds. The foundation also supported animal welfare causes, combining her old passion for veterinary work with her new career in music. "I realized that having a voice isn't just about singing," she explained during her first major television interview. "It's about using whatever platform you have to help others find their voices too." The foundation became a huge part of her identity as an artist. For every concert she performed, she would also do a free workshop for local students. She visited animal shelters and performed benefit concerts to raise money for rescue organizations. Her album, titled No More Shadows, was released to critical acclaim. Music critics praised her maturity, her unique sound, and her ability to blend different musical influences into something fresh and contemporary. The album debuted at number 2 on the charts, and several songs became radio hits. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came during her first sold-out concert at Madison Square Garden. As she stood on stage, looking out at 20,000 people singing along to her words, she thought back to that terrified girl who had been dragged onto the Apollo Theater stage. Halfway through the concert, she decided to share that story with her audience. "A year ago, I was planning to be a veterinarian," she told the crowd. "I had never sung in public, never wanted to be a performer, and I was terrified of ending up in the music industry. But sometimes life has different plans for us than we have for ourselves." She went on to explain how her manager had tried to humiliate her, how she had almost run off stage, and how finding the courage to sing that night had changed everything. "The lesson I learned," she continued, "is that our biggest moments of growth often come from our most uncomfortable moments. Sometimes we have to be brave enough to let people see who we really are, even when we're scared." The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. So tonight I want to invite anyone who has been hiding their voice, their talent, their truth, to find the courage to step into the light. The world needs to hear what you have to say. As the concert continued, Zara realized that she had found something she never knew she was looking for. She wasn't just her father's daughter anymore, or the girl who hid from music, or even the overnight sensation from the Apollo Theater. She was herself, completely and authentically, using her voice not just to entertain but to inspire and help others. The scared teenager who had been pushed onto that stage had become a confident young woman who chose to step into spotlights around the world. She had learned that sometimes the thing we're most afraid of becoming is exactly what we need to become to fulfill our purpose. And every night as she walked onto stages across the country, Zara remembered that moment at the Apollo Theater, when her voice had first found its power. It reminded her that transformation doesn't happen gradually over time. Sometimes it happens in a single, courageous moment when we decide to stop hiding and start being seen. The girl who once sang only in the privacy of her bedroom now had millions of people listening to every note, and she had never felt more at home with herself, than she did in those moments when her voice filled theaters and touched hearts around the world.